Typically, what I see when I'm working with grad students and postdocs is that most people get into this thinking that they really want to be a research faculty member. We did our undergraduate research in a lab, we had a great experience, and that really turned us on to this process of research. And so then we say, oh, well, what's the next step? Okay, I'll go get a PhD. But that's really all that we're exposed to. Once people actually spend a little bit of time doing research, they may decide, you know what, I don't know that I actually want to do this. I don't know that I want to work at an R1 level institution where I'm responsible for 50 to 80% of my own funding. The research that I do depends on the whims of Congress. And people decide, maybe this isn't really what I want to do. But since they haven't stepped outside, they don't really know what those other things could be. So they go to the obvious ones. Well, okay, if I don't want to stay at a university working at an R1 institution, then I'll go to industry. I'll do some work in the bioscience sector. Or I really like teaching, and so let me pursue a more teaching intensive career. Once they kick the tires on that a little bit, though, they start to see, yeah, it's not any easier to break into the bioscience sector. Or teaching positions are great, but they don't really pay that well. So maybe I'll think about something else. Recently, the career that keeps cropping up is medical writing. Medical writing is a very exciting career that allows you to use your scientific training and has a lot of benefits of things like being able to work remotely. So people say, oh, maybe I'll do that, but I don't really know. The problem comes when they wait longer and longer to figure out what they want to do next. And so then they get stuck and they start saying, well, I'll do something. Unfortunately for many students and postdocs, however, they wait so long that they find themselves in a position of needing a job. And at that point, they're stuck taking anything. One of the goals for today's lesson is to help you through this process in a more intentional way and avoid being stuck at the end where you're required just to take the next position that comes up because you don't have any other options. One of the realities that we need to talk about in this process is that for many folks who are interested in tenure track careers, they're running into this loggerhead of a dearth of positions. This is some data that's relatively old now, but it shows the number of annual PhDs awarded relative to the number of faculty positions created. As you can see with the blue lines, over time, the number of PhDs who are eligible to move into faculty positions has ballooned, where the number of faculty positions available remains relatively static. In 2011, there were about 7 times as many PhDs as there were faculty positions available to them. So the reality is that people who go through the process of graduate and postdoctoral training, who earn a PhD, they can't go into faculty positions as the only thing they can do. There simply are not enough positions available to absorb. So if they're not going into academia, where do they go? This is some data from the National Science Foundation Survey of Earned Doctorates, looking at post-graduation commitments of PhD students over the last 20 years. As you can see, in 2022, only 26.9% of graduates had plans to remain in academia. This is a big change from 1992, when you had 49.1% moving into academia. And so we're concerned. Fewer students are choosing to do postdocs. Fewer postdocs mean fewer faculty members. But the reality of the situation is that PhDs have always gone into other careers. I look at this a little differently. Back in 1992, over half of people who graduated with a life science PhD moved into something other than academia. We just don't talk about it. You can see those same numbers when you look at industry and other sectors. In 1992, only a quarter of life science PhD graduates moved into industry. That's up to almost over 54% in 2022. So the reality here is that there are lots of things PhDs can do. We just haven't had those intentional conversations. But what are these jobs? Well, we're pretty familiar with the ones in academia: assistant professor, associate professor. And oftentimes this is what people mean when they say they want to be faculty. But these are tenure track positions, and that's just one type of faculty career. Research assistant professors, that's the same path: research assistant, associate, full professor. These are very similar and equivalent in a lot of ways to a tenure track position, with the exception that there's no expectation for teaching or service. research associate or staff scientist, or lecturing. If you realize I only like teaching, there are positions that only require you to do that thing. Science education and outreach. If you're someone who has identified that teaching is something you enjoy, you might consider these. But it's more than just being in the classroom. Developing curriculum, working as education specialists, working for a museum. There are lots of opportunities where you can focus on science education that don't require having a faculty position. Science communication and publishing. I mentioned a second ago, medical writing is a field that's been growing. There are many ways that you can use your communication skills, and if you're someone who likes talking with people about science, these are great careers to consider. It's not just medical writing or science writing. You also could become an editor, scientific illustrator. There are many things that you can do within the communication space. Government and nonprofit. Oftentimes when I talk to students and postdocs, they're really trying to decide between academia or industry, and they don't really consider government labs. But there are lots of opportunities to continue doing exciting and impactful research working for the federal government or state government. These positions can be scientist, investigator, lab manager, study director, program manager. There are a lot of different things that you can do. Some of them involve the primary research, but others, like program manager or program officer, put you at the interface of deciding what types of research gets funded. Industry research. Here again, you can work as that primary scientist and potentially move your way up to director of research or study director. In many different scientific fields, there are lots of different scientific industry companies. An important note, though, is that not all companies function the same. And depending on the size of the company, you may be asked to do very different things. If you're someone who enjoys wearing lots of different hats, considering a smaller or mid-sized company might be a better fit. If you're somebody who knows that you like to do one thing and do that thing really well, then working for a bigger company might be a better option. Business and commercialization. So here, developing products, being a market researcher, field application scientists, positions where you actually work for the company to help scientists use that piece of equipment. Medical science liaisons, this has been a pretty big field. An MSL is someone who works for a pharmaceutical or a device company, and they basically teach people who are using that product how it works or why it's better than alternatives. You can also be an entrepreneur, starting up your own company if you have an idea. In the business and commercialization space, there's no shortage of opportunities. Law, policy, and regulatory affairs. People think about things like intellectual. These are opportunities for sure. However, oftentimes they require a law degree. Is that an additional commitment you want to make? Maybe, maybe not. An area that people often don't appreciate, though, that still stays connected to academia is the Technology Transfer Office. Tech transfer offices are charged with helping a university take their ideas and turn them into commercializable products. Your scientific expertise helping understand, is there really an option for this? Helping scientists at the academic institution shepherd it through that process. These are all ways for you to stay very connected to science while having a better understanding of what it's like to work in the business world. Law, policy, and regulatory affairs. People think about things like intellectual. These are opportunities for sure. However, oftentimes they require a law degree. Is that an additional commitment you want to make? Maybe, maybe not. An area that people often don't appreciate, though, that still stays connected to academia is the Technology Transfer Office. Tech transfer offices are charged with helping a university take their ideas and turn them into commercializable products. Your scientific expertise helping understand, is there really an option for this? Helping scientists at the academic institution shepherd it through that process. These are all ways for you to stay very connected to science while having a better understanding of what it's like to work in the business world. Medicine and healthcare. You may say, but I don't have an MD. So how do you know which one's right? Well, here's the rub. You may be feeling right now a little bit like this. I just presented all of these different career options. How do you choose? You're being overwhelmed with the number of things you could do. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. And when that happens, we know that people's happiness starts to decline. There's a phenomenon called the paradox of choice, where the more options you have, the lower your happiness becomes. And so for many graduate students and postdocs, they then find themselves stuck in this position, where you're working really hard, you're pushing as fast as you can, but you're not really going anywhere. But how do you know what's the right choice? Well, here's a place where I'd like to dispel a myth. That myth is that there's one career that is right for you. And I think that this gets passed down to us generationally. We think we're going to start our career, 50 years later we'll retire and get a gold watch. But that's not the reality. The reality is that there are many careers that you could enjoy. If you're someone who's identified that you like teaching, sure, you could become a lecturer and work at a university and teach in a classroom. But you also could be an MSL who's working in the clinic, helping physicians understand why that medication is a better option. Or you could be a field application scientist who's working with scientists, helping them understand how to get the best out of that piece of equipment. Or you could be a research administrator, working to support graduate students and postdocs as they explore their career interests. Once you drill into what you really enjoy doing, you start to see that there are many options that will allow you to do those things. So this is the heart of our career exploration process and theory. It all starts with self-awareness of your interests. Scientifically, what do you like doing? Do you like coming up with the ideas? Do you like writing the proposal? Do you like doing the data analysis? Who are you as an individual? We each have unique strengths. How do you leverage those? Once you have a better understanding of what you like doing professionally and what you're good at, then you can start to see what positions are available. Rather than starting with that, that's the area of these are things you can do. We want to ground you in the area of what do you want to do. After you've identified some potential matches though, how do you know? This is where informational interviewing comes in. Informational interviewing is such an important part of this process that we actually have a separate Greco lesson on it. Conducting an informational interview is just like asking for directions. You're reaching out to a professional, asking them for some advice and guidance on how they got there. Not only will this give you important information to make your career decisions, however, you also start to establish your professional network. This begins at a process where it's non-transactional. You're not asking someone if they know of a job or if they can write you a reference letter. You're simply asking for some guidance on how do you get from where you are now to where they are. Hearing from people is great, but it's even more important to test it out. How will you figure out if that's true? How will you figure out if you actually like doing that thing? Experiential learning is an important piece to this process. And at the end, you just go back to the beginning. Is this really what you enjoyed doing? You thought it was. Did expectation meet reality? If not, you start the process again. But being intentional about this and having it all start with you and your interests is the best way to find a good fit for your own career. Coming up next, we're going to focus on how do you actually build that self-awareness of your interests and how do you find those different career options.